Okay, guys, so I'm going to go over some of the questions from the breakout group so that if you didn't understand, you can kind of listen to my explanations. For a couple of these questions on number one, you can have multiple answers, all right? So let's start with this first one, and the key to this is just vocab. All right, so it says to name two adjacent angles, and if you remember, adjacent angles, the quick idea is that they have to be next to each other, okay? So tons of different answers here. I'm going to go ahead and just look at these two angles right here, okay, of angle CDG, and then right beside it is going to be this angle of HDE. All right, they share a vertex, they share a common side, and they don't have any common interior points. So two adjacent angles could be CDH, so angle CDH, and angle HDE. Okay. All right, next one is two acute vertical angles. So if you remember what makes vertical angles is they are the intersecting lines, all right? And there's multiple answers to this one, but I'm going to go ahead and just highlight these two lines right here that are intersecting. And so I'm looking for acute vertical angles, right? So what I'm going to see here is this angle of BFC, and then directly across from it is this angle of CFE or DFE, all right? So angle BFC and then the angle of DFE. Okay. All right, using those same angles that I've highlighted, I'm now looking for two obtuse vertical angles. And so these are going to be the ones that are adjacent to those two. So it's going to be this angle here of angle BFD. Oopsie. Okay, so angle BFD. And then directly across from that angle is going to be angle CFE. Okay, so obtuse, vertical, directly across from each other. So now we're going to go to complementary, and complementary means that they have to add up to equal 90 degrees. And adjacent means that they have to be side by side. So what I'm looking for are two angles that have to add up to 90 degrees that are right beside each other. So when I'm looking at this picture, I actually look for my right angle right here, all right, because that means that that's 90 degrees, right? Now, one angle by itself can't be complementary. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look right beside that angle, and I'm going to look at this angle of CDE, right? Because that angle of CDE also has to be 90 degrees. And what I'm going to look then is I'm going to see that this angle of CDE is split into two different angles. So I'm going to have angle CDH and angle HDE. Okay? All right, last two here. Now it says two complementary non-adjacent angles, right? So I need two angles that add up to 90 degrees, but non-adjacent means that they can't be touching. So I look at that picture, and I notice I only have two angles, all right, that are given numerical values, all right? So the 30 degrees and the 60 degrees. And so if I add those together, I get 90 degrees. So the two angles that are non-adjacent and complementary angles would be angle BCD and then angle BAD. Okay. Now our last pair is a linear pair, all right, whose vertex is F. So here's what I do is when I'm looking for linear pairs, I actually highlight the straight angle. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to split that straight angle into two different angles, right, by highlighting a ray. So these two angles, all right, these two adjacent angles are going to be a linear pair. So it's going to be this angle of BFC, so that angle right there, of angle BFC. And now I have to go down that ray. I'm going to pick a different color, but then go in the opposite direction. So now I have to go BFD. So the key to these types of questions is just really knowing your vocab, okay? All right, I'm going to now go into the example 2, so the always, sometimes, or never. And here we go. All right, supplementary angles are linear pairs. This is going to be sometimes. Because supplementary angles means that they have to add up to equal 180 degrees. But linear pairs mean that they have to be adjacent. And we know that we could have two angles like this, okay, where let's say that's 110 degrees. And then we have this angle that's not adjacent to it, and that's 70 degrees. And those would still add up to 180 degrees, but that's not a linear pair. So that's why it's sometimes, okay? Next one, vertical angles are adjacent. This is going to be never. All right, because the definition of vertical angles is actually non-adjacent angles formed by intersecting lines. All right, next one, complementary angles are adjacent. Again, this is going to be sometimes, because it's just like the one that we did with the supplementary angles, where all we know about complementary angles is they have to add up to equal to 90 degrees, right? So we don't need them to be adjacent. They could be adjacent, but we could easily have an angle like this, all right? That would be 60 degrees. And then an angle like this, that's 30 degrees. And one more time, those would add up to 90 degrees, all right? But they would not be adjacent. All right, next one, vertical angles are congruent. That's always. And it's always because we have the theorem, the vertical angles theorem, all right, that said that vertical angles are congruent. And now last one, vertical angles are supplementary. This is sometimes. There's only one case where some vertical angles are going to be supplementary, and it's when the lines are perpendicular. Because if you look here, if these are perpendicular, let's say angle 1, angle 2, angle 3, and angle 4. All right, angle 1 and angle 3 are vertical angles. But because they're perpendicular, both of these would be 90 degrees, which would mean that they would be congruent. But because those also add up to 180, they would also be supplementary. So this is the only case where these two angles would be both congruent and supplementary. All right, I'm going to pause here, and then I'll do example 3 next and example 4.